Hey kids, it's Jurassic James, and on this Jurassic James Explains, we're looking at Velociraptor. So same rules apply with the oldest to newest. And one thing to point out as well, this is a 50th video, 50th review on prehistoric models. So thank you for tuning in. So this is 2022, I'm filming this, and this is the 100-year anniversary of the first time the American History Museum under Roy Chapman Andrews' expedition went to Mongolia. The idea was that Mongolia is a desert. It's just a lot of it desert regions, hard to move around in. They had to use trucks and camels. It's a whole cool experience. I encourage you to look up the expedition in online, books everywhere. But the main thing I want to point out is they went there to scout out different things for future dig sites. The following year, in 1923, they found the first skull of Velociraptor. It was then sent to the museum in New York, and Henry Fairfield Osborn, who named the animal Velociraptor, meaning quick thief or quick grasper. So I have here one of those, like, you take the kids, like, you dig out the skeleton out of a little block thing. And what's really neat about it is this skull of Velociraptor, this design is actually pretty good. This is a really nice, small, frail little thing. And the biggest thing I want to point out with Velociraptor is the incredible obscurity for most of its history, meaning that, first of all, because of the remoteness, the name of the type species is Velociraptor mongoliensis, meaning from Mongolia. And the idea is that it's far away, and even today, when you're trying to research dinosaurs from all over the world, we have the internet now, but imagine how hard it is back in the 20s and 50s, where you're looking up, and of course with the wars, the Russians and everything kind of having influence in the area, it's hard to get that. So that's why I always tell paleontology students and kids, you want to know your history and geography, because why is it that it's hard to get information on Velociraptor? Well, it's from a different country that had different political leanings or at least connections and all that. So the main thing to point out is, for most of its history, from 1924 when it was formally named, it just wasn't really known that well. It was a skull and a couple of two finger bones. In that time, Dr. Ulstrom found the Deinonychus, we found other raptor types, and so the group were being the family of Finn was being kind of formulated, but it's later on they found the actual body of one. But that all goes forward because why? My first raptor here is this one here. This is the one from Jurassic Park 1, 1993. This is, I know for many kids, this is like a vintage model on eBay. But the thing about this particular figure is, it was my first experience in the animal. As a kid, I remember I liked dinosaurs like many kids, but in the theater, I had no idea what it was, because there was not a lot of Velociraptor stuff, out in the world, because no one really knew about it very much, outside scientific circles. So 1993 kind of comes around, and Jurassic Park comes out, and I've told the story in my Dromaeosauraptor video, the different families, and the idea is very simple. Michael Crichton, who wrote Jurassic Park, met Dr. Ulstrom, and he based the animal in the movie on Deinonychus. But the idea was he went with the name Velociraptor. It was cooler, and he's right. The idea Deinonychus means terrible claw, Velociraptor means quick thief or grasper. One sounds like a disease. I have Deinonychus, and then the other sounds like a sports car. The 2022 Velociraptor, kind of thing. Anyway, fast forward. I know many of you assume, Jurassic James is going to tear into Jurassic Park and how wrong it is. And obviously at this point, I think everyone knows that. My thing to point out here is to set a narrative. And the idea is there's two species of Velociraptor, but there are two minds of Velociraptor. There's the actual animal in science that we know and love, and we've studied and has gotten more attention recently. And then there's the animal in Jurassic Park. And in my mind, it's just like I can watch Pacific Rim or Godzilla and see these fictional creatures, and they're just a thing that's really cool. I don't take any scientific notice of them. They're cool. That's how I see the Velociraptors in Jurassic Park. They are their own thing. I call them leather tigers. There's these big animals with this, intelligent. Whereas Velociraptor itself, the actual animal we know of, extremely amazing. But the problem, of course, is there's this public image of it, basically. That is both helping paleontology by getting more awareness, but also hurting science because people are, they think that's real, kind of thing. Anyway, they hit the main points of this animal. Obviously, it's the skull's too thick. Velociraptor has a very narrow, thin skull, and I do have a 3D printed model. I'll do that in a separate video about, fossil stuff. But a very narrow skull. It has a dip in the front, and the idea is that it's really narrow, then it gets wide by the jaw, by the back of where the brain is and eyes. So this has this very meaty head, kind of like a very generic, not say generic, but a very lizard-like, V-shaped, Allosaurian minus crest kind of look to it. The hands, of course, are always wrong in Jurassic Park. Instead of having them like this, remember, dinosaurs lose their fingers going in. So the earliest land walking vertebrates had like 5 digits, and we see them losing it. So raptors would have had like this, not like the classic. When I was a kid, it was like this. We didn't know any better. It was a different time, kids. It was the 90s. But the idea is that the arms are like this. Now we know they're like this, and for grasping. The name raptor means grasping. Also want to point out that, the most important thing to point out is this little sickle claw. And although a toy only has 4 toes, raptors actually have, the toy has 3, real ones have 4. So basically what's going on is let's see, what we consider a pinky on the foot would be, a pinky toe is missing. So the thumb would be like a dew claw. It's kind of further up off the ground. You walk on these 2, and then this one is your what we call a ring finger on the foot would be the sickle claw we use here. Now the Jurassic Park raptor does not have the 4th claw; it just has the 3. And of course, the most interesting feature that people, when I was a kid, understand is this little part here, this little bump right there. And when I was a kid, a lot of little boys, particularly, thought it was the animal's genitalia. But we do have understanding that reptiles and birds either have internal genitalia, not external like mammals. And that's actually the pubis bone turned backwards. So on my model here, I'm going to pull the legs forward. This is the pubis bone. And normally it goes like further forward, like in a T-Rex or Pinacosaurus, but it turns backwards in Velociraptors. So that's what you're seeing depicted there. And I remember that was very annoying as a kid. I'm trying to, people like, oh, it's a pee-pee, like, it's a pubis bone. It's a turn-up. And of course, pubis bone sounds like other, Anyway, so here's the first one I made. Here's my first raptor, nostalgia galore. This one, I think their interpretation is I have the batteries removed, but if it pulls back, his arms do this kind of like this thing, and it will scream. What's ironic is that the hands look closer to reality. They're actually like this, not like that. So, of course, the first claw should be weight reduced, but overall, it's there. That's pretty cool. Same thing, 3 toes. The tail goes up. Now, with raptor tails, we see a lot of growth, like bones and stuff here that makes it very stiff. And in general, the idea behind that is they're jumping and grabbing things, and it's thought that the tail is like a rudder to help them kind of like if you put it up, it'll pull back and kind of go up like that. Or if they're running, the example why I do on tours, if a cheetah's chasing a gazelle, the gazelle banks left, the cheetah's tail can move and help it like that. So same thing there. But of course, these raptors are naked. They have no feathers whatsoever, and they have the same kind of this big, meaty skull. One thing that's really cool with the Jurassic Park 1 and 2, I think, is that they had the dinosaurs, of course, the adult dinosaurs, and you can buy the human figures, and it came with a baby dinosaur. And the big deal with that, of course, is that any baby dinosaur should have big eyes, big hands, big feet. Those are features that, it's how it develops over time growing up. But also the trick of evolution, that, if you see big eyes, big forehead, your brain goes, oh, it's adorable, we take care of that. So, which is ironic because in the Jurassic Park book, they have a baby Velociraptor in the park, basically. And Dr. Grant had this really interesting scene where when he first sees it, he picks it up and he starts examining it and holding it, touching it, and pressing on it. And the raptor baby gets scared and starts to scream or screech. And people are like, Mr. Grant, stop, whatever, Dr. Grant, stop. But in that moment, this man has spent his entire life studying these animals, and he has one in front of him he can actually touch for the first time. I get it. I mean, he's not trying to hurt the animal, but he's like, wow, here's how the muscles work and all that, So, in 1983, people say, well, if Deinonychus, I always use size analogy, so for a Velociraptor, I would say it was like a coyote. It's a very smaller animal and, more narrow design. A Deinonychus is like a wolf. And so Velociraptors, Utahraptor, the one they found they found Utahraptor in 1975, but it wasn't like named or acknowledged until 1993, the one they really kind of knew. So the idea there, they found remains of Utahraptor. They didn't know it was the same thing at the time. And I would say a Utahraptor is like a bear, So the question then is, if Utahraptor is like as tall as us and 20 feet long, why isn't that the one in the movie? It was named when they were making the movie. The book had already came out, the movie was being produced, and they found then. So, in short, the idea of raptors having, dromaeosaurs having feathers, it was kind of coming out. So, I have this, my early raptor, Raptor model. Now, one thing to point out is that the hands are correct. It's 1993, so same year. The skull does have the proper indentation right there, a little crest right there, a little ridge. The hands are correct, but again, it's the model. I mean, it's naked, no feathers, but the model in general, it's not balanced very well. It kind of, I mean, I can't even get this stand up actually, but the pubis bone is right there in the back. That's the right number of toes. The tail should be more stiff here. It's more flexible at the base actually. But anyway, so overall, it gets the point across. You know, it's a really good model for the year it came out in. But in general, it was naked. And again, I actually don't discredit toy makers of the past not having features they wouldn't have known about. Meaning that we didn't know they had feathers in 1993. So the idea is, or the theory hadn't really been out, you know, or accepted. So for them not to make it a toy with feathers makes sense. Now, again, in the later movies, I have my own opinion, but whatever. So another model I want to point out, let's see, is right here. And the idea with this one is, I'm not sure which year it was, but it's a Safari, these larger models. And it, again, has not completely committed to feathers, but it's based on that 1997 discovery of the ulna. So in your arm, if you're a human, or any vertebrate with limbs, you have your humerus here, your ulna on your radius. The ulna is the bigger of the two bones in your lower arm. The ulna bone, they found, had little notches in it for feather quills to go due to the skin to attach to. So the idea that there's feathers right there is a sign of that, basically. The feathers on the head, at this point, they had found imprints of raptor-like animals in the 90s, raptor cousins, essentially. They had feathers on their head. So you kind of, now, the idea of it sitting like this on top is because it's not necessarily that it was a mohawk. It may have been they had feathers, but when it got fossilized, it would have pushed up like that. So they've applied it to Velociraptor in that way. One thing to point out with this concept is that we don't find, like, I mean, there's 12, well, more than 12 Velociraptor skeletons or parts known, but which is a lot for a dromaeosaur. But a lot of times we're looking at the cousins of different dinosaurs, comparing them, saying, well, if this one has this and that one has that, and they're related to each other, they have this, right? Anyway, the Lost World comes out. They have another Velociraptor. It's the same exact model as the first one, just repaint. Chaos Theory comes out, and Jurassic Park has the which I personally am not a fan of. The idea of them mixing up different dinosaur species and making up new stuff. I mean, I know there's a market for that, and kids like it, but that's like the extreme version. Like, the Velociraptors are already not real, much less this other thing that never existed, right? So but they did make a Chaos Theory Raptor that was just a really cool paint job, which is neat. The same thing too. They had like a Series 2 model that was just the same mold. The baby raptor that came with the movie was came with Peter Ludlow, the villain in the movie, basically. And here it is here. Although it took away, ironically, the first raptor toy, baby, had the hands kind of like this, and now part 2 one has like this. They went backwards in the sense of that idea. It was called the Cyclops Raptor model. And this guy here is, it had a lot of injuries on it. There's a scene in Jurassic Park 2, Lost World, where Sarah Harding is hanging outside of a roof, and there's 2 raptors below her, trying to, get to her. She falls, and they begin fighting each other. And many in the Jurassic Park fan lore think that this guy represents that. Because there's all kind of scars on the animals, claw marks that are 3 raking hands, not a T-Rex, and a scar on the eye, his name Cyclops. By the time, I've always been very selective of raptors, so like they're still making a lot of generic ones out there. So like this guy, you get those like pack of 10, pack of whatever, Toys R Us toy pack. So this guy again has actually the dew claw. It has the pubis kind of turned backwards. The hands are, proportionally doesn't make any sense. It's like this generic dinosaur look, which again, there's no such thing as a generic dinosaur look because there's no such thing as a generic dinosaur. That's like saying a generic mammal. There's no. I mean, I guess people say like a mouse, but it's not about numbers. It's just like, what do people think of it? That's the generic look to it. And this guy has, weird shaped head, tiny tail. So again, not terrible. And I always want to point out that if you have a figure, I'm like, it's not accurate. I'm not saying it's garbage, throw it away. I'm just saying that it misses certain features. If that toy makes you happy, that's all that matters. For example, this Raptor toy right here, the one I showed you first, that toy is incredibly inaccurate, but it makes me incredibly happy. And at the end of the day, that's all that matters, right? In that sense, right? Just don't write a scientific paper about that toy. Another one, there was a pack, I remember I bought this in a museum gift shop, and it was like a pack of 4, and there's Raptor in there too. It has those, it's feathered, so like kudos. but like the tail is too small. It weighs though, but the hands are doing the broken wrist thing. I call it the broken wrist. Again, if you took a raptor and you turned their wrist that way, it would break their wrist basically. So that's why I call it that basically. But not a scientific term, just my Jamesism. But overall, as a dew claw, that's not on the ground. It's good. The toe here, that's pretty good model, minus the hands. And the skull does dip down somewhat, but it should be more narrow in general. So the next one I want to point out is my childhood, one of my other favorites. There was these models that are super articulate. The idea here is that this guy, I mean, it's one of those paleo artist debates or fights where is the animal very meaty or is it very skin pulled back, And the idea here is very simple, is that when you're looking at this, you say, well, how does this animal, look in real life? And we showed the picture of a hippo skull. And there's a thing on like Instagram or Twitter where it's a picture of a hippo skull. And we know what hippos look like today. Of course, we live with them in general. But the image of the hippo recreated by paleo artists, I just kind of like, if paleo artists didn't know what real hippos look like, how they draw them. And it shows the hippo with the sabers and everything, really skin tight, like a Gorgon looking thing. So it's just interesting. But this is one of those skin tight Velociraptor designs. And again, the hands, it's as if they're not sure, because the left forelimb is the Jurassic Park style, and the right forelimb is kind of turned to the side. So they're trying to give both options, One thing to point out too, the feet are pretty small. A lot of the later Jurassic Park raptors, they have big feet for engineering purposes to stand up. But the animal's feet would have been dinosaurs would have had very thin, narrow feet. Think of, not quite a cow or a deer, but the idea that there's a torso up here and it's suspended on these, these little limbs. So that's what you're saying. Like wolves too, or birds, they have this, So when I see dinosaurs with fat feet, it's like, that's weird. But all the parts are there. And now I will point out at this point the fighting dinosaurs, because the dueling dinosaurs is a different thing, where they found a Velociraptor in 1970s, and it was fighting a Protoceratops and had his claw in its throat, and the Protoceratops had his beak on they were found like this, and they were found in sandstone, so like a sand dune environment, Aeolian environment. So the one thing I want to point out that idea real quickly is Dr. Hone said that may have been like either starving and desperate or really stupid Velociraptor to fight that way. I don't know. But one thing with fossils to remember too is that this is just a snapshot of one individual's death. And the example I can give you is for you kids who are young, there's a man named Evel Knievel who was a stunt man. He would jump stuff on a motorcycle. And say, for example, an archaeologist found Evel Knievel's body. He is not a representation of what most humans do. He's jumping over buses on a fire, on a motorcycle, So the idea is that when we find one skeleton, it may be a cool story, it may be very, very neat to look at or understand or derive things from, but remember that maybe just that individual may be more brash, some more calm, But again, the fighting dinosaurs is an amazing skeleton. If you're ever in New York, go to the museum and see it there. Now, Disney's Dinosaur came out, and they had a Velociraptor. Okay, you're not gonna stand. Cool. A Velociraptor, and it was really cool seeing actually when Aladar, spoiler alert, 20 years later, is on the mainland with his lemur family on his back, and these raptors kind of show up, and he had never in the movie, if you don't know, the iguanodon egg is carried off to an island where he's raised by lemurs, which were not Cretaceous; they were way later, but whatever. And basically, he doesn't know dinosaurs, so the meteorite strikes, and they go to the mainland, and he's now walking around this like post-meteorite, it clears up very clearly. Like the meteorite hits, like a day later, it's like a blue sky, All right. But the idea here is that he runs to Velociraptors, and he doesn't know what they are, and he's looking around, and then they start attacking him, and he runs away, and he finds a herd that way, the herbivore herd. So the Velociraptor there, minus the feathers, they look pretty good, actually. They have, their skulls are very narrow and thin. They're, we don't know what they sound like, but there's an assumption that bigger animals make deeper noises, smaller animals make more screechy noises. There's even a part where he's running, and the raptor jumps on his side and just grabs onto him, and it's like just hanging onto him for a second. And it's like the dinosaurs hide. The iguanodon would have been so thick that could have happened. Their claws weren't that huge long, So anyway, that was kind of fun to point out. But in Safari, they had these tubes, basically, and there was a Velociraptor in this one. And again, this one is sitting on its tail for engineering reasons. Its hands are both like this. It has a very narrow skull. I like all those parts. But one thing to point out too with this particular model, or the idea of this, is that Velociraptor was known from the old times, like the early 1900s, but it didn't experience, because of its lack of popularity, it didn't experience a lot of the recreation, the reinterpretation that we see with other dinosaurs. So like T-Rex was found, it was popular, and we see it changing its forms over time. Triceratops, Allosaurus, Brontosaurus. It's a very popular name. It's out there to public, and it changes its look over every, like a celebrity, every decade, new look kind of thing. But Velociraptor, because it was so obscure, no one made toys of it. No one cared about it. It was this foreign species that we all saw in the book. Picture of a skull, move on. And then Jurassic Park hits, and all of a sudden it's out there. And so the toys, for the most part, have their tails off the ground, or if they're on the ground, it's a balancing engineering thing. There's an understanding that the idea of having feathers is not alien. It's like, well, that's a possibility because they're bird-like. And we have dinosaur renaissance stuff already happened. Dr. Bacher and Dr. Ostrom are putting their ideas out there. So Velociraptor comes after all of that, basically. Anyway, so tirade. So Jurassic Park 3 comes around and they say, you know what? Different island, different dinosaurs. Let's make the raptors, even though it's the same island as Part 2, let's make the raptors different. And they give them feathers, but they don't want to commit to it too much because, there is a look to the animal. And they have feathers on this one, and they do sexual dimorphism. Sexual meaning boy or girl, and in that time, in the belief, di meaning two, like dissection, more form. So the idea that the males and females of a species look different. And so in the movie, they have the female raptors look like this kind of, again, these are toys of, in the movie, they look like the other raptors in all movies, but their paint job changes. The toys paint and design change. And the idea is that, what I don't like again is that there's the dino damage that are just, there's an open wound. Like initially it would be a broken skin, removed, but whatever. Part 3, they went kind of really cheap with those toys. So here's the first alpha-like raptor, a female. Then they had another raptor, like a generic female, like that's the rest of the pack. So they were acknowledging feathers, but for those, people who were small kids when Jurassic Park 3 came out were super excited and enjoyed it. Pinacosaurus was a big rave. But for those of us who remember the franchise from earlier on, it was kind of petering out. It's like, okay, they're not doing the same level of storytelling. So at that point, and in my youth, Jurassic Park was done. There was comics here and there were other things, but it was pretty much kind of petering out. So that kind of gave Velociraptor a breath of not having that movie out, but the influence is already there. A lot of times we see where a movie, Jurassic Park comes out or any kind of, and the toys of non-Jurassic Park things will gear towards that, like the Dilophosaurus and the neck frill. That they make every other Dilophosaurus toy that's not scientifically focused is neck frill, and it's like this new trajectory for the animal that's not real. So that's why I separate the idea of Velociraptor mongoliensis from Velociraptor Jurassic Parkensis, or Isla Nublarensis, whatever you want to call it. Not a real scientific name, that second one. But the idea is that we have this kind of like, again, I think it was 07, a featherless raptor, so a naked raptor. The tails seem, it's pretty nice. All the fingers are there, the hands are correct, really correct, minus the feathers, of course. Feathers would have started from the middle finger going back that way. And of course a repaint. So as a kid, I'd be like, sexual dimorphism, this is a boy, it's a girl, girls are duller to hide, and the males are brighter to get attention like birds. But again, we even then have to be kind of careful because what makes, it's kind of like we say, well, whatever we don't know about the dinosaur, we associate bird stuff to it. And that's like saying, well, whatever we don't know about James's great-great-grandfather, let's just look at what James does and apply that to him. And the idea is that, like, well, James today uses an iPad, whatever. Well, that doesn't mean my great-grandpa has an iPad, So if there's certain traits birds have, birds have evolved a lot, 75 million years or so since Velociraptor. It's not easy to assume that whatever a bird did will fill in the blanks kind of thing. Keep that in mind. But overall, pretty neat model, minus the feathers. So the Jurassic Park Papo, a company, pops up, and they do these, and this is one of my favorite figures actually in my collection because it is a nostalgia figure, alone, not science, and it looks just like a Velociraptor from Jurassic Park. And the idea is that it's the same paint job, same proportions. It's entirely incorrect scientifically, but again, it's nostalgia. It's, you know, when you're kids, when you get old enough, things from your childhood will seem amazing to you, and you'll remember them fondly, despite any flaws. When I went to Big Bend, my first long distance at the time geology field trip, I took this one with us. I was just, you know, for my own reasons. They repainted it because obviously to the Jurassic Park 3 Raptor-esque colors, because why not? Then we have this guy here, and the idea is that this one is like a crossbreed between what science knows and what Jurassic Park says. Overall, I mean, the hands are the very much, you know, incorrect, but the skull is kind of has that dip, but it's not as narrow. But overall, it's not wrong. It's just not the best. But I'm not hating on it. When I saw it, I was like, snatch! I bought it instantly. So fast forward, Jurassic World comes out, you know, and Hasbro, in my opinion, in this situation, does a really kind of a poor job. The Jurassic World 2015 toys are not the best, in my opinion. And the only one, I bought the Ceratosaurus, the Allosaurus, because they were the most normal. They had a lot of hybrids, and they had these gals, really, the 4 Raptors. So they kind of went back to the original Raptor plan. So this is when most people go, you know, why did Jurassic Park update the Raptors? But there's 2 thoughts. One is that they're trying to use the old genetic code and make the Raptors again, and, you know, movie inverse. But the most obvious reason is marketing, money. They've already established this thing in the 90s, and people love it and know it, and why would you change that? One of the biggest of science is that I always say in science, you never marry your ideas, you only date them. The idea is, the concept is, when you find a theory or hypothesis, that is true until you find evidence against it, or, you know, beyond, or disproves it. And the idea, if you marry your idea and it's proven wrong, you stick with it no matter what, you know. But if you date your idea and go, oh, better evidence, you can go, I'm sorry, old idea, this is a better option for me. So anyway, so the Raptors here. Now, one thing to point out, you know, it's blue, Charlie, Echo, Delta. I don't remember which. I know blue, but I don't remember the other ones. But they're just a green, brown, yellow, and then blue's gray with a blue stripe. Although this one has no blue stripe because, you know, that's not how she's named or anything. But what's really neat is that these guys are sold individually. They screech or make noise, and you like that. But they had individual ones. They had a 4-pack at Target that you can buy them that didn't make noises. They were just solid figures, same mold. And the thing is, they're the dew claw, the second claw, the first claw, the 4th claw, the one that's the big one, was like, and the one that's a 4-pack was just flat and the same size as their claws. And one of the main features that means dromaeosaur that people know is that feature, and they left it off that toy. And I remember I was like, why would you, you know, it's like having a toy human on a opposable thumb. That's what we were known for, you know. Anyway, so here they all are. Safari comes along, they're updating. So essentially, it took like this design, and they said, let's do it like with feathers and real. And the hands are correct; they're you know, sideways. One thing to point out is that the only kind of critique on the hand is that the feathers would start from the middle finger going back. So the idea of it having like a sleeve of feathers, they will start here, basically. Other than that, pretty good. The narrow skull. The way everything's great there. I like this one a lot, actually. The wrist may not go that far back, but just in general, you know, they're kind of grasping. The Safari baby dinosaur tube has one. Essentially, this one's chick, or, you know, and it essentially has all the parts there. The feathers, ironically, on the smaller one, go down to the whole hand. Interesting enough. But so then we have this guy here, which I believe is a gift, and again, it has the hands are more correct. So the first claw would not have feathers on it. It will start here and go back. The arms or wings would have been too small. They weren't really wings. They just had feathers on them. They would be too small to fly. So Velociraptor could not fly. But everything else here, the dew claw is there. You know, the number of feathers. Paleo artists are in debating, and I'm speaking I'm treading very lightly. But the amount of feathers, how they're designed, depends on a lot of factors. But anyway, so really cool thing here. Now, then we get to the Jurassic World models. And it's just corporate shamelessness. But I will say Mattel has taken it to a new level. Mattel came in for Jurassic Park, the one before now, Exploding Volcano one. Basically what's going on is they said, we're going to make every dinosaur you want and the ones you didn't know exist. So a lot of my reviews now are Mattel inspired. I'll get a new Mattel figure and I'll bring up my Safari and Papa ones and go, here's a comparison, you know. So same rules apply as the first set. We have our blue and then the yellow one and then I believe the brown one and the green one. So Charlie Echo Delta, you know, if anything, they're filler anyway characters. Blue was a focus. So basically the first type has just kind of, you know, the proportions are really awful, but, you know, giant feet, the weird side, you know, the tails, it's flexible where it shouldn't be. The hands are, again, they're trying to not betray their past. So the hands aren't like this, but they're like that. So it's still not correct, but it's like, you know, we're hinting at it. The head has that meaty Velociraptor Jurassic Park head. You know, they're keeping that in canon. And what they, of course, have done is they essentially have taken these guys, and when you have the 4 name raptors, 3 of them which are dead, you just do a repaint of one. Oh, new raptor. Repaint of the other. Ah, new raptor. And then do the same thing again. So they take blue here. This one has the dino damage because we saw in the last Jurassic Park, Jurassic World, she was injured, so why not? Take her and repaint her as a generic raptor. And I've been seeing that these same designs have been all, they're giving each Charlie, Echo, and Delta another model figure to sell. Same rules apply to the first one. They are all heavy feet design. This one has an arm movement because that's really important. But the idea is that these guys are all designed to, you know, same arm movement. There you go, just doing this. Big feet. Now, the feet make, at least it's not real, but it makes some sense with these guys, because these are the ones that, like, you push them down and they hop up, which, you know, raptors are known for jumping, so, you know. But they just repaint that over and over again, and, you know, this one has feathers, so that's how you know it's science. But in the end, they take the same design, and they had the legacy pack where you can buy John Hammond with Ellie Sattler, and you have this one for the 2 raptors that are in the movie. And well, the 2 we saw at a time in the kitchen scene, and then later on we saw another one in CoverGirl and the Rotunda. So basically what's going on is that we get down to the last 2 models I'll go over. Baby Blue, which comes with one of the Owen figures. And again, I don't recall there being any known baby Velociraptor found. We only found adults, or at least sub-adults, you know. But, I mean, if you only find so many adults, you're going to find very less babies usually. And of course, this one here, which is on my website, my icon for Velociraptor is this one for my theropods and Velociraptors. So this one, Papo, is to me, at least to 2022, what I have in my room, is the most accurate one, because it has the feathers starting from the second finger. It has a narrow skull. That the crest is a little bit higher than but you know, if you have the skull has a little ridge there, and you have more, you know, growth on that in life, I can see that. You have the 4 toes, they're all proportionate. Tail has a little fan there based on many other Dromaeosaur relatives and finds. So it's a pretty great model, and I highly endorse this one until next year when I make another one that's even more accurate. Real quick, I know we're going over time. Velociraptor was found, I mentioned earlier, with Protoceratops. Also, it is found with Oviraptor, I mean, like the exact same strata. Now, there are other Oviraptorids all over the world. I mean there's some in North America, North American Asia, but the Oviraptor, the actual first genus, is the one that we all know the most, was found with Velociraptor in Mongolia, and the nest that's seen in all the papers on that topic. And last but not least, Pinacosaurus and Ankylosaur. I've only found these like dollar store Pinacosaurus, which but there is one for PNSO that's come out recently. I want to look into at some point. I might do a video on that one if I buy that one with the other ones I have. But anyway, so they're found in the same environment, more of a deserty region. So again, there's way more about Velociraptor than I'm telling you, but I wanted to do a rundown of the general figures, all the figures. Let me know in the comments about what you want to see more of, details, focus, whatever. I can do just like certain raptors in the future, Velociraptor Part 2 kind of thing. But right now, I'm going to go over the general gist of this animal's history in our pop culture. And that being said, I'll see you next week. Thank you very much. Thank you for tuning in.